This is the voice of Bold Business Radio. I am your host, Jess Dewell. Thanks for being here today. We are talking personal strengths and problem solving. Now, I'm not so sure about this personal strengths piece, which is one of the reasons I threw it in. Y'all know I love problem solving and the steps to problem solving and how it shows up in the spectrum of with which we are viewing different parts of that particular skill. Yet when we think about strengths, what do we actually think about? How do we think about our own strengths? How do we think about the strengths of others? Do we consciously use them, or is everything that we think about with our strengths unconscious? And what happens if we swapped it around and made sure that all the time we were conscious about our strengths as we were applying that to each situation we encounter every single day? Big life questions and teeny tiny, in the minutia, daily questions. Like, darn it, my pencil just broke again, and I can't go to the pencil sharpener in the middle of a radio show, right? One thing. So what do you do? Anyway, I'm going to introduce you to our panel, and then you get to meet them right after our introduction. Andrea Keatts, president at AMBK Research, is an effective and talented financial writer and educator who is able to distill large amounts of information into understandable and memorable points. Scowcroft of the Scott Treatment uses his talent in finding the untold story within media presented to him, takes your video and increases the content not only by creating individual bite-sized pieces, but distilling all of the elements into a beginning, a middle, and an end, purposing your multimedia content many different ways. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Andrea, we want to know, how do we use our strengths to solve problems?
I think using strengths to solve problems is a little bit of a double-edged sword. I think it's very natural that people would lean towards their natural tendencies and their strengths to want to tackle an issue, especially if they're trying to be a productive member of a team and really work towards a common goal. On the other side of that, there is a saying that when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And I think that at the same time people are trying to utilize their strengths and use their powers for good, they can also get trapped into a way of thinking and being where they have a hammer in their hand and every single problem they approach looks like a nail. And although you might want a problem to be a nail, you might approach a problem like a nail, not every problem is necessarily a nail. I tend to be a little bit more of an analytic type. I think that helps me to solve problems and that I'm always looking for the root of the problem. I had a situation I encountered back in college in my sorority days where there was an orange and two of the sisters in the house wanted the orange. The problem at first glance seemed to be that there was only one orange and two people wanted it. But when we all talked about it, it turned out that one of the sisters wanted the orange peel so she could zest it and use it in a cake. And the other sister wanted the orange juice from the pulp of the orange. So it turned out that one orange between two people was not necessarily a problem because when we really got down to it, they wanted different parts. Looking for the root of a problem instead of just taking a problem as it at first presents itself, I think can be a really good solution when you're looking to solve something.
Hey, Scott, we want to know, how do we use our strengths to solve problems?
The question implies there's a relationship between a strength and a problem, and that relationship is awareness. And to begin with, it's self-awareness, to know what your strengths are and then how they relate to a problem. And I think there's a second component, and that is that when you talk about strengths, there's a relationship between strengths and weaknesses. That's juxtaposition. You can't have a strength without a weakness because you have to have some sort of measurement. So I would say that it's a combination of self-awareness and knowing your strengths and how they apply to the problem at hand The second component would be to know your weaknesses and to identify if you want to change your weakness into a strength, there's a way to do that. Or if you want to delegate to someone else what your weakness is so that you don't have to worry about it. And a lot of entrepreneurs, for example, say, one of my weaknesses is accounting, so I hire someone to do that. Turning your weakness into strength can be illustrated by someone who plays the piano. If you want to be a good pianist, then you sit down and you play and you have your passion, and that works really well. But if you want to be at the top of your game and very professional, they say, don't practice what you do well, don't practice to your strength, practice those parts of the score, those techniques that you have the most trouble with. So you spend so much time with the ones that you have trouble with that your overall performance will go up, and then at the time of performance in front of an audience, for example, then you'll be far better than had you just sat down and played whatever came easiest or whatever pleased you the most. So your question was how to use strengths to solve a problem. Know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, know which ones you want to turn into strengths, and then know which ones you just want to shed and delegate to someone else.
I guess my first thing is, how do we know that we have a problem that needs to be solved in general? How do we know we have a problem that we need to solve before we apply anything to it?
I think the first key indicator that there might be a problem somewhere is anxiety or feelings of discontentment in a business setting, among friends, in any type of gathering, or even when you're by yourself. Voices, kind of the pitch and timbre of voices starts to go up a little bit. The energy in the room gets a little bit more tense. And I think people will start to react to a problem or situation emotionally before they might even cognitively realize that something's gone off the rails.
The other side of the coin is data. To be able to measure and find out what data there is, to measure that against benchmarks is another way of identifying if there's a problem. And then maybe it's a combination of the two. So if you can blend both intuition and facts, that can help point you to a way forward.
Those are really good points, Scott. And I think you just brought up a really important differentiator here is that if we have the decision-making tree, problems can reside on either one or the other two main branches of the tree. On one side, we have the qualitative, which are your interpersonal problems, your less concrete issues, disagreements, things that are more interpersonal. And then on the other branch, we have more of our quantitative, data-driven issues. For example, if a portfolio manager were underperforming, they might be able to look at performance versus a benchmark or risk metrics to figure out what had caused it. So that would be more of a quantitative type issue. On the qualitative side, that's where the intuition and the pitch and timbre of the voices going up and those interpersonal reactions would probably be the first tip off. So I think we're dealing with two decidedly different types of problems.
And I'm wondering if there's a third. I wonder if it's that self-reflection of, if I have a weakness and I want to improve that weakness, can't I define that as the beginning of my problem-solving process? My problem is I am lacking a skill. Or in the case of the qualitative data pointing out somebody is underperforming, what skill is missing is a different approach to the problem. Instead of saying, hey, the data says we've got a problem, fix it. Well, how do we fix it? What is the actual problem that is creating this result, this undesirable result?
I was just going to be a bit glib and throw out there that if you discover a weakness, but it's for a skill that you really don't need very often, is that a problem?
I love it. That's totally glibly perfect.
Sorry, Scott. Please go ahead. I'm sure what you had to say was much more substantial than that.
Well, my hope is that it was just as glib. You can take a look at a problem as an opportunity rather than a detriment. A couple of examples of that, or at least one example, is that you might be seeking a client and the client turns you down. And then all of a sudden you think, oh, this is terrible. But it could be, on the one hand, well, let's turn this into a learning opportunity. What is it that made this client not feel like we're a good match. And the other side of it is, whew, we dodged that bullet because,
Yes.
who wants to have a bad client? So maybe what is thought to be a problem is actually a blessing in disguise. Another way of going about it also is to reframe the problem. If I can't achieve that goal, what better goal can I achieve other than that? And by turning it on its head, what is that martial art that you take the energy that's coming at you?
Tai Chi?
Keto?
Aikido.
Aikido, okay.
So if you were to apply those principles, all of a sudden the problem turns into an opportunity that way by reframing what the issues are.
Maybe there's an elephant in the room. Are we trying to avoid the word "we have a problem" or the phrase "we have a problem"?
No, it's a 5-star phrase. Why not call it out when you have it?
And that's where I was going. I agree, Scott. I think every single thing that you said is great, except for the fact that it started with, we've worked with each other so long, I love you. So we can go here. If we automatically reframe and we skip the fact that we actually had a problem that is starting us down this path of needing to reframe, looking for the opportunity, recognizing the resistance, how do we know we actually have steps we can follow and we're not reinventing the wheel every time?
They say the definition of an entrepreneur is a person who's been able to pick him or herself up one more time than they fell down. So the act of picking oneself up off the floor and dusting off the issues and whatnot and persevering, having with the stamina, well, every time you fall down can be thought of as a problem. For me, the elephant in the room is, and then what? And oh, well, Jess, you've heard this only about 15 or 20,000 times from me. It's not the issue. It's how you respond to it, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yes. And okay, so maybe we've got two things going on here. This might be a little awkward, Andrea. You might need to play referee here.
I can do that. I have a whistle. My rape whistle is in my bag, actually. And so I'm just going to grab it.
Based on what I've heard so far, this is one of your strengths.
I love it.
Very true, actually. Yes.
Let's think about this because we've got a whole bunch of things that are coming up here. Are we willing to call a problem, even if it's, let's see, I forgot my water. So I made a start about 1 minute late because of that. That could technically cause somebody serious angst and disruption in their day. Against my better judgment, I went and I got the water. Or maybe against to make sure that I was hydrated so I didn't cough and was uncomfortable and distracted, I went and got the water. And so we're talking about responses to things. I also think we're talking about priorities in some capacity of what's worth calling a problem and actually solving the steps and what's not.
So problem is in the eye of the beholder is what I hear you saying.
That's exactly it. And I'm wondering, I think that might be a thing because what will take me off kilter and really make my day hard to recover and be productive or actually be present in activities is most likely going to be very different for you, Andrea, and for you, Scott. And it changes over time, I think, too.
I would agree. It does change over time. And I think your threshold for tolerance of a problem has to do with how much your resistance has been worn down recently, other things that you may or may not have had to deal with, and your general frame of mind when encountering that particular issue. So are problems universal, or are they a day-to-day mood-dependent type of thing?
And thank you. You allowed me to remember the word that I was having so much trouble with, and that was resilience.
Oh, yes.
The resilience has a lot to do with how one can have a tolerance for problems. Not entirely, but to a great degree, resilience is within our own control. Now, it might be that there are exercises, there are practices that a person can go through to increase one's resilience. And ones that I've heard about is, get good amount of sleep, have nice nutrition, exercise, have good attitude. Okay. Don't surround yourself with people who are negative because that can wear you down. What are some of the other ways that one can build up resilience?
Keep falling down. You already said that. Let's honor that. Getting back up after you fall down over and over and over again. Watch any kid learning how to crawl. A really persistent student in college retake that one class that they know that they need, and the light bulb just has not clicked yet, and they're willing to spend the money again and again and again until it finally sinks in. Those, I think, are also a big part of resilience, the willingness to have something not work out.
Do you think of resilience more of like a callus that builds up on your skin over time as you rub and test a particular area? Or is it more like a muscle that wears out from fatigue? There have been studies done to show that willpower, which could or could not be likened to resilience, depending upon your attitude towards willpower and your school of thought and background. But willpower for a long time was thought to be a muscle in the sense that when you use it, it becomes stronger and you get better at exercising it. And recent studies have shown that it might actually be the opposite, where yes, it is kind of like a muscle, but the more you have to exercise it, the more fatigued that muscle becomes, and the more your ability to flex that muscle diminishes. So when it comes to resilience, which side of the coin do you think we're on? Or does it depend on the situation?
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay.
It depends. It depends. You know, there's the mental resilience of, all right, I've gone through that before, I can call on past experience. Or the resilience of, wow, this is beyond what I know I can do. Owning the fact that I have reached a limit of some kind and not letting that stop me, reaching out to find something new, to bring in a new experience. And so to me, those are more muscle-like. Now, if I always chose the hard path, if I always was putting myself in situations, basically creating my own reality for difficult times all the time, everything's a drama, no matter what's going on, it's going to be bad, no matter what's happening, I'm going to be late, no matter this, no matter that, that I think drains any sense of resilience. So you might get really good at managing it, yet, I'm wondering if sometimes when we're not doing some of those base things like what Scott was talking about, we tend to fall back on what we know, and we're in reaction mode instead of respond mode. And I'm curious what you think too. Personally, willpower is response. I'm going to choose how to interact with the situation versus react. Oh my gosh, this is happening to me. What am I going to do about it?
You this time took the words right out of my mouth, the respond versus react mentality. There is an author I'm a huge fan of. He wrote a book called 10% Happier, and he talks about responding versus reacting. And that's something that I've had to do and learn and internalize and turn into a new habit, because I used to be a reactor. And after letting that play out unpleasantly over a series of experiences over the course of many years, I've learned, you know what, don't answer that email right away. It might not be the email you wanted. It might not be a situation that's playing out the way you would have chosen in your ideal world, but it's still savable. The relationship is salvageable. The situation is salvageable. Think about the type of reaction and response that you would want if you were on the other side of this, and craft a response. And things have gone much better for me since I have internalized that type of attitude and let that play out. I highly recommend that.
What is better? Is it better to respond or to react?
I think it's better to respond.
And what's the difference between the two?
I think your reaction is your knee jerk and your hair trigger. It's that little voice in your head. It's the chemical reaction that plays out when you get news that is displeasing to you. And it is the direct response of that internal chemical reaction. I think when you respond to something, you are able to rationalize your thoughts, to think about the way to best apply your genuine feelings, but also craft them in such a way where you're not harming the relationship and you are presenting the situation in a controlled fashion and trying to come towards a solution that is best for everybody.
I love that. My answer is similar and so very different.
Yay.
Because there's this point in time, right? Things are happening. There's action going on. Everything's playing off of each other. And all of a sudden, we realize we're there. Holy cow, we're in the middle of this. That's actually pretty cool to know. And actually, even we could go one step lower or higher, depending on how you want to look at it. This concept of we get done with a situation and we're like, why did that happen again? What is the thing that makes this particular outcome and everybody feel this particular way? What is that? Noticing that is a level of awareness, which is the beginning of potential response. We're looking at the behaviors. We're doing just a little bit of reflection and saying, yeah, okay, there's something here. Not sure what it is, but I know. And then the more we notice and can observe and use some of these core competencies that go along with that, just listening, what's going to happen, the more we're doing that, the more we're going to realize sooner. So we'll say that was the base. We got done. We recognize that. We didn't like it. We see a pattern. Once we see the pattern and we keep noticing that pattern, we'll see the pattern in a different place. It'll be in the middle of this crazy situation. Telling your kid no, having to repeat yourself or repeat directions or instructions or a process. Now I'm thinking of the Office space where he didn't get the memo of filling out the right report and everybody and their brother came to him and said, you didn't do this report right. And everybody was worried about the fact the report didn't get done versus finding out, did anybody else talk to you about this? Things like that. So they're in the middle of a situation and it's like, oh yeah, I'm in the middle of this. I may have caused it, I may not have, but I get that we're going down the same path. I'm in the middle of the pattern. And then with more awareness, more practice, more listening and observing, we see it
at the beginning. Yes.
Right at that moment. Oh, do I want to continue down this path and play out this pattern? Do I want to show up differently and see what happens? That takes courage to do.
It takes a lot of strength to realize and internalize the fact that you are your common denominator in every situation that you encounter.
Well, that's one of my favorite themes is with some modification, you create your own reality.
Yes.
Do you have a different approach? Because Andrea and I, we were saying similar things, just laying them out in a very different way. And so I'm curious if you had a third way to say it, or if you lump yourself with one of our viewpoints a little more than the other.
Or maybe you think we're both wrong.
That's true.
On the contrary, you can take a look at an elephant in at least three different ways. They talk about how musicians or maybe baseball players are in their zone, gymnasts, so forth, where everything seems to disappear and they can just merely focus in on what they're doing. I didn't realize this until the other day. I was reading that when you're a professional baseball player, the baseball is coming at you so fast that you can't see the baseball travel towards you. So you have to, as a batter, be aware of the circumstances, be aware of the pitcher, be aware of yourself, and those things that are leading up to the pitch all are data input, and it's because you've trained yourself and you're observant and all of the other things that go into the equation. You're able to predict where that ball is going to go and how you're supposed to swing your bat so that it's going to meet the baseball at the time that it crosses the plate. The major higher cognitive part of our brains are being able to read facial expressions. So if you don't have that skill, if that's one of your weaknesses, then there are a number of problems. But if you, first of all, have that as a strength, and maybe secondly, cultivate that so that when you look at body language, you're able to not only recognize what it is, but then to be able to interpret it at a certain point. You can use that as being in your zone in a business sense. And when you're in a meeting around a conference table or in a video call, such as we are right now, you'll be sensitive to what's going on and be more in control of yourself, and then to the extent that you want to be in control of the situation.
How much of this do y'all suppose is nature versus nurture?
Jess and I have a friend who wrote a book called The Sniper Mind, David Amerlin. His research is into the training of snipers, in which 80% of those who go through the training fail. To that extent, that would be nature, because they're just not up to the ability of taking it to the next step, to become someone who can perform highly under difficult circumstances.
Sure, that makes sense.
The nurture part is that for those 20% who can make the grade, it's not that they arrive automatically. There's a fair amount of training that they need to go through, and it's three-dimensional. He used snipers because it's a pretty black and white or pretty clear way of illustrating a point. Baseball and other sports figures are similar, but it doesn't stop there. It's also in everyday life, and it's also in terms of the business environment. There's a philosophy, or there's a point of view that everybody is capable of developing themselves far beyond where they are right now to play to their strengths.
I agree.
And that's a little bit of the topic of this entire show, is that identify what your strengths are and your weaknesses. And for those weaknesses that you just can't compensate for, then compensate for them by having either someone else do it or by somehow not letting that get in the way. Meanwhile, optimize what your strengths are so that you can be, quite frankly, more effective than the next person. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're on a team, you want to be as effective as you possibly can. And you find that niche and exploit it for everything it can do. And at the end of the day, you'll live without regret.
This is what the Sniper Mind talks about, is what are the patterns that make somebody be able to have something become second nature? Whether it's Michael Jordan and all the misses that he had to get as good as he was professionally, the first chair flute player in the Boston Symphony, whatever the case may be, there's a lot of practice that goes into it. The resilience, whether we respond or react, what our perception is, all makes a difference. And then on top of that, it's repetition. We've got those everyday problems like, whatever, I forgot a thing. Oh, I've got to figure out how to leave 5 minutes early so that I can go do this other thing that didn't happen, whatever the case may be, right? But then we've got bigger things. We've got bigger things like pure safety. And now I'm thinking of a story when we first moved here. Our son was 4. He was riding a bike that was a Strider bike, and he didn't want a Strider bike because all of his friends had training wheels. So we got him a training wheel bike. Well, then getting those training wheels off was really interesting again, right? You have to relearn balance. There are different muscle sets that you're using. And here we are, we're riding our bikes home from a restaurant. We said, let's go out to dinner. And we rode our bikes. He comes down this hill really fast, and I'm thinking, slow down. And it eventually came out of my mouth almost too late. And he was already sliding to avoid going headfirst into rushing water because it was the springtime where we have a lot of stuff happening here. I'm totally freaking out. My kid's on the ground. I'm like, did he get in the water? I can't tell if he's in the water. What's going on here? And this big rushing stuff. And we get down there and he is shaken and he is really scared. And I had, do I respond? Do I react? Mom is reacting. Now, character development, logical person, supportive, create a resilient child to be somebody who can look at the world in a way that would be beneficial, said, all that practicing of stopping and pedaling and using your brakes and falling down helped you. How do you feel that you didn't get in the water?
One way to look at it.
Oh, I know. This is so great. I said, because you practice, because you ride your bike, your body knew what to do to change course automatically. And we need to be able to rely on that. Where I'm going with this is problem solving is that type of a skill, right? Mm-hmm. We run out of toothpaste. We don't have an ingredient for dinner. Somebody calls us and our whole day changes. Okay, we do those things. No problem. And I don't necessarily think they're responses at all. I think they could be, reactions. I think they very well could be responses because we've done the steps so much. So what happens if we deconstruct it? Does problem solving actually then become one of our strengths? I'm curious. What do you guys think?
I think it can. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell that said 10,000 hours of something to become an expert. Hey, you're holding up a copy of Outliers. I love it.
10% someplace else in my office.
I have worked with people who can't solve problems. It's not to say that they're not intelligent, brilliant people. When they are faced with a choice, and I think that the ability to make informed decisions is a key step in solving a problem. There are people who can't make decisions because they've never faced scarcity and they have never had to practice making a decision and living with that decision. Problem solving can absolutely become a strength, and it's built off of being able to analyze an entire situation and then back into the decisions or things that need to happen in order to reach an outcome with the most utility for all those involved.
Wow, that's great. Another way of what you're saying is that there are some leaders and there are some followers. In this culture, we feel that everyone should be a leader, and maybe we're all leaders in our own way, but there's nothing wrong with being a follower. There's nothing wrong in letting someone else make the decisions and then you support the decisions.
I agree. I agree.
That was a good reframe, Scott, because here's what I was going to say. Yes, people don't know how to problem solve. And yes, it impacts their life. And yes, they do not get to where they want to go with their saving, their wealth, their career path, their relationships, their car that they want to drive, the not wanting to cook or not wanting to clean their own house. All of those things come down to how can we problem solve?
How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to live your life? And that is a function of all the little decisions that you make during the day and how you set yourself up.
That's a good argument for the revered institution of holy matrimony, or at least significant others, because you can try and do it yourself, or what you do is you team up with someone whose strengths are your weaknesses and vice versa, and the two of you, if you think of yourself as less than whole, then the two of you, at least eventually, will grow into a working unit that would be whole.
Very good point.
And then the other component is that we all work in teams. And I think we're going through a revolution now in that the online collaboration tools that are available to individuals allow us to come together around a project as a team and to be able to move forward from that. It's not too dissimilar from brick and mortar, except for in this instance, you get to choose whom you work with instead of having to have the talent of working with whomever the boss hired, who's in the cubicle or the office next to you. So it's a different set of skills. And under the new, you might call it the gig economy or whatever's happening, you get to choose whomever you work with. And
hallelujah. And it's so much better.
And I think it's revolutionary.
So let's say somebody's listening and they can't choose. They got a job. They need that job. They've got to pay the bills. They got to put their stuff on the table. I like this conversation very much, and I'm gonna put on hat of realist. I never really go pessimistic, but I'm gonna stick in realist right now. There are those people out there. There are those situations where, okay, so now what though? Right? Now what? What is my first step if I want to make a change to get to that place where I have more choice? Like what you were talking about in this, yes, it has arrived, but it hasn't arrived for everybody.
True.
Can you spell soft skills?
Like as an acronym with other skills making up the word soft skills?
No.
It's hard to get canned if people like you. So as far as soft skills are concerned, yeah, I think how you show up and how you relate to your colleagues, especially the difficult ones. It's easy to be nice to someone you like. It takes real talent and composure to nurture a relationship with someone whom you find unpleasant right off the bat. But as you get to know them, they might not be so bad. And people who like you are more likely to lift you up and promote you and your career. And it doesn't pay to show up with a bad attitude. And while you are nurturing your relationships and contributing to the team with a big smile, you can make a couple small changes in your life to maybe cut back on your expenses so you can sock money away in a savings account that will help you bridge that gap when you quit your job currently and go off on your own. As someone who left my employer in December and started my own company in January of this year, I spent 9 months putting money away so that when the door to the airplane opened and I stepped off of that little platform, I had a ripcord to pull with a parachute. And I wasn't just hoping I landed on a mattress somewhere 30,000 feet below me to soften my fall. There are little things that you can do, that you can put in place to make your entrepreneurship goals a reality. And it might take a little while, but you have to have savings. You have to know people who have done what you are trying to do. It's like the old adage, if I can see it, I can be it. So get in touch, expand your network, get in touch with people who have done what you're looking to do. Successful, happy people want to help other people be happy and successful. So get in touch with these people, even if you don't know them. Hit them up, ask them to coffee. You'll be amazed at who will reach down and want to pull you up alongside of them. These people are out there, and you have to have a safety net, and you have to find them, and then, do whatever the hell you want.
Congratulations. I'm so proud of you, Andrea.
Thank you.
In my mind, there are two paradigms people can follow. One is a competitive model, and then the other one is the collaborative model. And in a world of scarcity, I suppose the competitive model, or at least the American capitalist way of going about it, and there are the cultures too, I suppose, where it's dog eat dog, and it's the rat race, and there are all sorts of other animal metaphors out there, I suppose. But a lot of people are rejecting that nowadays. You get together, and if we help each other out, that's going to help the larger organism. And prior to the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the way that societies worked, a lot of the agrarian cultures have been very successful through the eons, utilizing a model that is different than what you and I grew up with. And my only hope is that we're returning to our roots so that we can do just exactly what you said.
Speaking of roots, having a frame of reference, and whether people are pulling us up beside them, right? Because we have the courage to ask, whether we're going out and figuring things out on our own, some combination of that. We're also reliant on what was modeled to us. If we didn't have a really good model, we must go find a model we like to learn it and figure it out, because it's not going to come second nature to us. Our strengths may be because of the hardships that we had in our family. Our weaknesses may be because of how easy and privileged we were in our family growing up, our upbringing, and the experiences we chose to go after, our risk tolerance, all of those things. And it makes me wonder, what are the things that you do to realize and maybe even recognize when you don't know what you don't know?
Usually that realization hits me at the same time my face is smashing into a brick wall. For me personally, it really takes a sudden hard stop from crashing into something to clue me into the fact that I may have missed something. Either that could be a weakness on my part. I am not quite so good at looking around and asking questions when I don't know that I have a question. I don't know how else to word that. You get in a situation and you go way, way, way off course, and someone says to you, well, why didn't you ask if you didn't know? And then my answer is, I didn't know I didn't know. So I didn't know I needed to ask something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. It does. What do you think, Scott?
I find that I will go out and I will ask either for advice or some help, and I feel duty bound to not just blow it off, but to really think deeply about the advice. Why ask if you're not willing to follow it? Maybe that's where faith comes in terms of personal and even business relationships is, well, I'm going out on faith because you're successful, because of all of these other reasons, and because you've said that. I don't know what I don't know, and you do, so let's try it this way. Maybe wisdom is to know when to follow that path and when to avoid it. Your answer?
I'm not influenced by either one of yours because I so believe, and this is where my stake is in the ground. And actually, it's a strength, it's a value, it's my curiosity. And so for me, it's all right, I know there's so much out there I don't know, and I don't know what I need to know or when I need to know it. So I'm going to go do things that are outside of my typical daily life to learn from other people. So for example, this at once upon a time in my past, in a in a land far, far away, right? I was in the technology world, and I just went, this only came to mind because I actually grabbed, this was a glass I grabbed from my cupboard. It's MicroConf. So I was at MicroConf this year for 2018. I've known about this conference for 14 years. I have not gone until this year. It's technology. It's using technology. It's building businesses, SaaS models, things like that. I'm not in that industry anymore. However, the way you run a company is the same across all industries. So it's always neat to go. And this is what I do in my work with Red Direction is we're building organizational culture. So how do I keep on the cutting edge of everything going on everywhere? I'm industry agnostic. And I don't know what I don't know about organizational culture because I haven't talked to every single company that's out there. So my curiosity drives me. What makes you do those things? How did you choose those priorities? And this is, by the way, life stuff too. When I'm meeting a new person, those are the types of questions that I'm asking them, getting a sense of who they are, how well do they know themselves, so that I can show up and be present with them exactly where they are, and then see what could come from that. So mine is curiosity as a value. It's one of my 3 values, my personal values, as well as being a strength of mine and a soft skill, having the wherewithal to go seek information you are interested in. Maybe you just need a new way to think, so maybe you're not interested in it. But it helps you think. I'm trying to think. I belong to a couple of networking groups that the sole purpose for going is to see other people in other walks of life, in other stages of business than what I typically work in, and the lives that are related to that, just to know what's going on, just to have that breadth of experience, because I don't know when I'm going to need that. But now I have expanded my ability to go out when I come up against a problem or an idea that I might have, to throw it up with that lens that I'm picking up from all these different places. Maybe reach out and have a phone call. Maybe reach out and have a conversation. And, you know, MicroConf was one of the things that I did this year for me. Rob Walling and Mike Tabor are really cool guys who have put this on. And I'm glad I went, and I'd go again because I went with a specific intention, not realizing I didn't know what I didn't know, and came home with all kinds of cool stuff.
Awesome. Good for you.
Filling this brain. So that's what put myself in weird, new, different situations that may not have a reason, yet always end up having a reason.
Cool.
Mind blown. I like it.
Thank you. Our time is basically up.
No.
So I have one more question for each of you. What makes it bold? What makes it bold to combine personal strengths and problem solving?
Problem solving is going out on a limb. If you don't solve it, if you go through that exercise and the problem gets worse, then, you know, it's worse, right? Almost by definition. You have to be bold in order to apply your talents to solve problems.
I think problem solving is thought leadership. And that is bold because you are leading. When you are providing thought leadership, you are stepping up and taking a position as a leader. You're providing a path where none existed before. And that takes guts. That takes the wherewithal to get up and say, these are my thoughts and this is the best I can do. And here it is. And there's a lot of vulnerability in that. And I think it takes a lot of strength to put yourself out there like that and be vulnerable. I am a big fan of these things called demotivational posters. And one that stands out to me in particular has a beautiful picture of a green, pristine lawn. And it has one blade of grass coming up above all the others. And it says, the tallest blade of grass is first to be cut by the mower. Well, it's funny because there is a lot of truth to that in some cultures, unfortunately. And when you draw attention to yourself, you risk being cut down. But unless you take that risk, you're not going to grow, you're not going to gain anything. And so I think problem solving is very, very bold, because when you solve a problem, you're exposing yourself and you're putting yourself out there for other people to see. And some might like it and some are going to cut you. But you have to take the chance.
You heard it here. Personal strengths and problem solving. Find the show notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P151. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 151. Also, you can search the website for personal strengths and problem solving. The thing is, we've all got problems that we face day to day, and we're figuring out, how do we deal with them? How do we make sure we're aware enough to respond? How do we approach making sure that the way we're interacting with a problem is actually outside of a vacuum that we can easily create? The discussion and interview that you heard here helps us understand how to tie those together. There's a next step. The next step is your voice. Your voice, because together, how we act, what we think, what we actually do, the choices that we're making define what being a leader is today. That's what the Voice of Bold Business Radio is about. Share your comments on this program. Let me and Scott and Andrea know what you faced, what you think about knowing when a problem arises, what resilience is. How do you use problem solving, and is that in itself a personal trait of strength? How do we deal with what we don't know? We don't know. That and more is what was discussed today. Pick one, share, and make sure you subscribe. Subscribe to the Voice of Bold Business Radio by stopping by our live stream on Tuesdays on Facebook and YouTube, by subscribing to YouTube and iTunes and iHeartRadio and many others that you can find. All of the places we distribute are on the voiceofboldbusiness.com. Make sure you've got a mechanism to get the next show and the show after that and the show after that delivered directly to your preferred listening platform. There is a direct correlation with the way we view our personal strengths and problem solving.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.